Hello, this is Dr. David Edward-Ooi Poon, founder of Advocacy for Family Reunification at the Canadian Border, or now Faces of Advocacy. Our guest today is MP Gladu, the MP from Sarnia, the one who stood for us first in the House of Commons, who put our petition forth and has been fighting for not only border towns, for all of Canadians for family reunification. So we are so glad to have our original champion here today on the Faces of Advocacy champion interviews. Thank you so much for coming, MP Gladu.
Hey, thank you, David, for having me, and it's been a pleasure to, be a strong voice on this issue. This is something that we need to keep pressing the government on. There are still gaps that need to be closed.
It's incredible that we're still fighting this fight 15 weeks into the campaign and many, many months after the border closures. But you have been a strong proponent for us. We'll have ample opportunity because I want the people to know what you have done. But let's start with the basics. Why is family reunification important to Canadians and the people of Sarnia?
Well, I got into this originally because Sarnia is a border community. And as you can appreciate, we have a huge number of individuals that are intermarried with the U.S., that work in the U.S. And so when the border was shut initially, people thought it would only be a matter of weeks. But as the months went, we continued to see people struggling, those that were not able to be reunified as couples, people that were having their first baby that couldn't, have the husband attend. So there were a lot of issues that came to my office, and it was that brought me to ask questions in the House and start pressing the government.
Yes, and you got to see our post. We have applauded you for that. Honestly, when those questions came up, we were like, "Oh, let's look at who she is. Oh, she's amazing." We were all so happy, and then you kept pressing, and that meant so much.
Well, what was great, David, is that at the beginning, Minister Blair just sort of said blah blah, but then he said he was going to do something about it, and then the Prime Minister took the initial step in June to announce an order in council that did cover some of the gap and allow immediate family reunification. But of course, those that were just partners with no common law status, no legal married status were left out. And people who had property in the States couldn't go visit the property. There were people wanting to care for an ailing parent who was dying, who couldn't cross. And so again, the need to press, but what was great is across the country, we saw multiple MPs in border communities and those without that got behind the issue and were willing to stand up and press the government.
Yes, and that has been incredible, and I attribute a lot of that to your leadership and standing for us as a champion. So on behalf of both myself, the Faces of Advocacy, and our entire group, we thank you so much for that, MP Gladu. So what specific concerns...
You're just committed that I'm not getting up.
I'm so sorry, could you repeat that? I'm sorry, it dropped.
I just said that my commitment to the group is that I'm going to keep pressing the government. I'm not giving up.
Thank you so much. So what are the unique challenges a border town faces with family reunification not being done?
Well, pre-COVID, people's expectation was that they could go back and forth freely. And so many work in the States and return home to Canada. And those individuals have actually had to remain over in the States in many cases. And so they've been apart now almost 6 months. Similarly, people coming across to care for sick parents on both sides of the border, they're currently not being allowed to go. And so those parents, in many cases, some with dementia, some suffering, are alone. And then the saddest story that I heard was a woman who was giving birth to her first child, and her partner was not allowed over and was refused several times. And so each of these cases I've been able to escalate to ministers to try to get them resolved. But tourism is the other thing that we haven't talked about that's also a big deal on the border. We get a lot of our business from Americans coming for day trips, and that's simply not able to happen right now.
You're one of the first high-profile people in the government to stand for voting Canadians. You bravely spoke in the House of Commons multiple times fighting for us. So what gave you that strength? What led you to lead support and for our petition E2657? We eventually amassed over 5,300 signatures in 1 month. So what gave you that strength to push forward with us?
Well, what was great is that, with the initial push to get the government to do the immediate reunification, when they made those changes and started to grant some of our exemption requests, then that gave me the courage to push for more. And it was at that time that the language of your e-petition came across to me. It just fit perfectly into how I was pushing the government. So I was happy to get behind it. And when we saw that there were thousands of people immediately that signed, I was able to send it to the Prime Minister, to Chrystia Freeland, to Marco Mendicino, to Bill Blair, and let them know, hey, this petition is coming to you. It's been signed by thousands. You need to take action now and not wait. You know, sometimes it's 45 days that the e-petition has to be there before it can actually be tabled in the House.
Yes. We are incredibly grateful because at that time, it was not a lot of high profile people, but I know when we contacted you, you said, yes, absolutely. And we were just so glad. So how has family separation affected mental health?
Well, the mental health of every Canadian is being affected by COVID, but it's particularly bad for those that have been forced to be separated from their long-term partners for months and months. They have done polling and studies that clearly show this has taken its toll, increase in desire to commit suicide, people suffering from depression, and some of these things will have long-term effects. So, you know, I think it's important that the government act immediately and you know, get protocols in place. I've been calling for them to at least use protocols with COVID testing, you know, before you come over, in order to protect Canadians and, you know, settle everyone's concerns, and then to not mandatory isolate for 14 days if you have a negative test, to not make people stay here for that full time, because with the work situation, some people need to go back to work and maybe they only want to be here 5 days. But if they don't have COVID and they're tested before they come and they're tested when they go back and they still don't have it, then there's no risk to anyone, and that would really facilitate people being reunited.
So that's how you see family reunification occurring safely in Canada.
Yeah, I think that addresses everyone's concerns. And the reality is, you know, with the COVID frequency we're seeing in the States, people are not wanting to open up the borders totally. But that doesn't mean we can't make exceptions for Canadians, when in fact we're making exceptions for other people that are not Canadians. We have foreign students that are being allowed in. We have people flying in supposedly commercially, bringing COVID to the country. And then we have illegal asylum seekers. So why are these people being allowed to get together when we're keeping Canadians from being with their true loves?
So I know what you've done for your constituents and your voting Canadians and permanent residents, and the group knows what you've done. So do you mind telling the people, new viewers, what have you been doing for your constituents, and let them know how you fought for us?
Good. Well, in addition to, you know, raising this in the House in the virtual sessions and bringing the e-petition on a case-by-case basis, I have been, you know, peppering the government with the cases that are unjust, and where necessary, bringing in the media to bring attention to these issues. And we have had great success in having people reunified. The lady that I spoke of that had her first child has got her partner with her now. Many of those that have been separated, that have ailing and dying parents, we've been able to, you know, get the government to address these situations. And so my hope is that by continuing to press and by continuing to provide solutions that will work, that the government will take those solutions and put them in place quickly.
That person who you helped to cross without revealing anything about that person's name or particular story was so grateful. And that person has expressed to me that it was the work that you have done that very likely helped them with the reunification. It's unfortunate that depending on the person who's working that day at the border agency, and depending on what political climate it is that day, that person, had they not had your strength, may not have been able to come in. So as a whole group, and on behalf of that person, we were so happy.
So a lot of it is about perseverance, but I would also say that there are some excellent people that have been working in Bill Blair's office that have done a lot of work to help me, and I'm thankful for them.
And so the last question is, what message do you have for families who currently feel alone, isolated, and just not heard by the government right now? What message do you have for them?
My message is, don't give up hope. We're not going to stop fighting. We return to Parliament on the 23rd for the throne speech. And in the meantime, I continue to hound the government with emails demanding a response. I think each individual needs to do what they can to reach out to their MPs across the country to make sure that this issue is understood. I also believe that there is a legal issue here of discrimination against people based on their family status. I think that's a very sound legal argument, and I know that there are human rights lawyers that have gotten engaged and are starting to make forays to the government to let them understand this cannot continue.
Yes, our policy proposal with family reunification quarantine plan actually outlines the charter violation, and you have been the only MP willing to speak out on this charter violation in the House of Commons, and we're so grateful for you for that. At the moment,
well, you know what? I'm representing my constituents, and many of them are having their rights violated, and many of them are suffering, the kinds of mental health impacts that we've talked about, as well as, financial burden from having to be a part.
Let's hope that we can get this resolved soon, so we do not have to have more conflict over this, and you can continue to take care of the people of Sarnia, who are so lucky to have you. I want to thank you very much for being here today with us on behalf of the group and myself. And personally, you have been our champion from the start. We will herald you as our champion for a very long time, and you will not be forgotten for the great work that you did for us, MP Gladu. I speak for all
Well,
of us
David,
here.
thank you for having me today, but thank you also for your advocacy and for that of your team. You have a very strong team of intelligent people that are making sound arguments, and the government needs to take action and listen.
We're very lucky to have that team. To anyone watching this right now, to anyone feeling disenfranchised, alone, and forgotten by the government, please join us in the campaign at facesofadvocacy.com. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and now YouTube at Faces of Advocacy. We are not asking for open borders. We are just asking to be together. Please send your thanks to MP Gladu, and we're signing off in 3, 2, 1.